Hi, I'm Anthony, and this is Bob Barker, and today we're going to show you how to turn this into this. Let's get started. So this is the area where we keep Bob Barker's stuff, and it's just a little bit too messy and it's not easy to get stuff, so we decided to put some pull-out trays just in this area for now to make it a little easier for us. And here I'm measuring all the dimensions, including the lip there for the spacers where the sliders will attach to the drawers. And that's what we're starting off with here. I'm using some scraps that I still had left over from the workbench build, and I'm just cutting those down to the length. And then for here, we're going to cut those down to the width that the spacers need to be. Now, each one of the two sides is a different measurement on my particular cabinet, so I'm going to have to run one along the table saw and rip it down, and then I'll readjust it so I can do the other one. So with these, they'll end up bringing the sides flush to the opening for my side mount drawer slides that I'm planning on using on this particular project. And of course, you can use any type of wood really that you want for this. It's just a spacer. And after we have those down to size, now it's time to get the drawer sides. For this pull-out tray, I decided I wanted it just kind of deep enough to hold stuff, but not too deep enough to be like a real true drawer. So I just kind of set up a good size there, and I ran the Baltic plywood, and this is 3/4 inch to get a couple slices here, and then I cut down the sides for it for each of the two trays that I'll be making. And I still don't have my miter station, which at some point I will be building. So I just brought my miter saw out here, and I was a little too lazy to attach the vacuum, so you can see all the dust that it kicks up. It kind of makes a mess. That's something that I will have to address at some point. And for this particular project, we decided that we were going to do two drawers because it suits the needs that we have for it. And this is not necessarily going to be a permanent solution for us, because we do plan on redoing the kitchen probably within the next year or so. So this is just to make things nice and functional for us in the meantime. So now that I got all the pieces cut up for the sides of the drawers, I wanted to put a little bit of a rabbet joint on the bottoms of each of them. So I use a sacrificial fence here that I just kind of clamp to my regular fence. That way with the dado blade that I'm going to be using, it won't mess up my fence. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch plywood for the bottom, so I use that to mark the height of my dado blade. And then I'm just going to go ahead and run each one of these pieces along the edge there and just get those little rabbet joints set up. And of course, having the dado stack is not necessary to do this. You can use your regular blade and just run multiple cuts. You can even just use a router to get the same cut. I just kind of like doing it this way because it's a little bit faster, and I do have the dado stack, so might as well use it. And I also did want to mention that I am intentionally doing these trays different than I did the drawer on my workbench, which if you haven't seen that video, you should go check it out. It's a pretty good build, and it's a very useful one. As you can see, I'm getting use out of it right here. But the reason why I'm doing it different, because I just figured it's kind of fun just to do things in different ways, because there's a ton of different ways to build drawers, and you might as well just kind of get a little experience and have some fun with doing each one of the different methods. So for here, I'm getting the bottoms cut out. I'm using 1/4 inch plywood as opposed to the 3/4 inch that I'm using for the sides of it. This will still get me a sturdy enough surface once I get it all done. And I decided I'm going to go ahead and use pocket holes to attach these, because I'll be doing that across the back and across the front, where I'm going to have a face plate which is going to cover it, so you'll never see either one of those. So as I'm assembling it, I clamped it up, make sure everything is nice and square, and make sure those clamps are tight, because when you put in these pocket holes, it has a tendency to drift if you don't have good clamps on it. And then we get that nice and secure. Then it's time to fit the bottom, make sure it fits good. And then you can go ahead and just glue it and screw it in place. And with this, it was definitely good to do pre-drill it and countersink it. However, I think the lip that I made was a little bit too small, so it made it very narrow. I was able still to get it done, but I had to angle a little bit so the screws wouldn't kind of go through the wood and show on the top side of the drawer. So if I had to redo this again, I would have added a little bit more space for myself to do that. So as you can see, it still came out nice. I think there was a slight bulge in just like one of the screw joints there. So now we're going ahead and doing the same process on the second one. You can see on this one I'm being extra careful, making sure I got a good angle where the screws are going to catch and hold well and not show through anywhere. And I am checking it as I go to secure it down to make sure everything stays square, and as I'm putting this in, it doesn't pull it out of square and then secure it in an awkward position. So this one came out pretty good. Here I am cleaning up a little bit of the glue squeeze out that I had. There wasn't too much there. Still nice and clean, and looks like it's going to work pretty good. So next was cutting out the faces for these trays. I ended up just using some poplar that I kind of hand picked through the huge stack at my box store to find kind of the coloration and grain that I was looking for to match the drawers decently well. So cut a couple of those down to size, and just to get a nice little surface on the top of it where you're gonna feel it, we put a little round over on there. Then we can go ahead and clamp it onto the front of the trays and then just drill out some pilot holes and then screw it into place. And just like that, the tray is done. Except for we do have two trays, so I have to do the same process for the other one as well. And with those together, I just went ahead and sanded down the front face of it, as well as like the inside and any surfaces where your hands are going to end up touching. I'm going to make sure you're not getting any splinters and everything is nice and smooth to the touch. And right here, I just kind of wanted to go over it again with sandpaper by hand just to make sure it's exactly how I wanted it. And of course, while I'm doing that, Bob Barker is wandering around there in the background. Then eventually he comes in and decides that he needs some attention. So we let him come in and inspect the work and make sure it's up to his standards. So with the trays made, it was time to get them ready for installation. So here I'm putting the spacers in. For the first one, I'm just using the existing shelf for the location of it. So I'm just putting this spacer just flat against it and drilling some holes through and then screwing it into place. I did come back later and put an extra one. Now here, I really should have just used some tape or something else to keep these in place, which I did do on the other side. But this one, I just kind of held it in place with the spacers to get my placing for the second spacer, but they just kept on falling. And at least I was able to get it done, but I just didn't make it easy on myself. I could have just threw some duct tape on there and just kept those up against the wall. So after I eventually got those in place, it's time to go ahead and set up the drawer slides. So I used an extra piece of plywood I had there as a spacer, and then just marked out the holes where I want the slider to go on. And then it just did a small little pre-drill just so it goes nicely. And then went ahead and used some other screws to get this secured into place. Now here is a problem. Drawer should be sliding in well, and you can see it starts to, and then it sticks. Ugh. Turns out these 30-year plus old cabinets are not square. So I went and remeasured it, and from front to back, the opening is a little bit over 1/4 of an inch off. So what I ended up deciding to do is I used my crosscut jig to cut a wedge off of those spacers that I make to account for the unsquareness of those cabinets. So as you can see, it actually cut a little bit of a cool pattern off of this spacer that's going through the different layers of the plywood. and that made it go in so much nicer. So now if we did both sides, it goes in just fine. And so for the top spacer here, I'm just using some clamps just to hold the slider in place. And I did happen to make these spacers about the same size as the sliders, so it's easier just to kind of clamp them there. Then we screw those into place, and then we can get the sliders placed onto the drawers. And just for ease, I'm just lining it up onto the bottom here and then screwing them on. Then we can go ahead and install it. And later on, I did go back and put some wipe-on polyurethane finish on it just to make it a little bit more resistant to wear and tear. And when he saw them in place, Bob Barker had to check it out, so he decided to give it a good strength test, and it held up pretty well. So this is what we started with, and this is what we ended up with. I will have some detailed plans available in case you're interested in replicating this type of project. So that's it for now, and we'll see you guys next time.